Aha!
Hi and welcome back to the Classic Mini 1976 shell rebuild. We're moving on now, coming forward of the main body of the shell, and we're going to have a quick look at the front end. I've had to modify my rotisserie slightly. The reason I've done that is because the arm, which is basically the pole that runs all the way through, was much longer. It would have basically meant that pole was coming through the bonnet, and setting out a front end like this with the wings and the front valance and the eye panels really necessitates the bonnet to be in place, because everything really touches the bonnet and all the panel gaps have to be correct. So I've moved the support of the rotisserie inwards. I've still got the option of attaching the longer arm on if needs be. So at the moment this is acting more like a stand than a rotisserie, because obviously the shell can't rotate with this captured in the middle of the subframe, the front subframe, or be it the inner wings as well. So it's acting like a support at the moment, but the front subframe is on. It's a Mark III shell. That basically means that the front subframe is solidly mounted to the car. The subframe is mounted to the car in three places. It's mounted on these two turrets here, bolted through from the top of this cross member. It's bolted in the two positions on the front toe board or floor of the car. There's a couple of bolts each side, but I'll take you in to have a little closer look at those. And the third area it's attached, or will be attached, is on this front valance, as I can call it. It's a little bit different to anything after the Mark III shell. Mark IV onwards haven't got what's called a solidly mounted front subframe that's basically attached to the shell with some rubber mountings. You'll have a teardrop mounting on the two front positions here if it was a Mark IV, and the arms of the subframe at the back would be slightly shorter, and the arms at the back would be connected to the toe board with some brackets and some rubber in between. People, from what I've read anyway, seem to prefer these solid mounted front subframes, because you're supposed to get a better response handling wise from the front of the car. There's no flex or perceived flex in the front subframe when it's solidly mounted, in comparison to what you must have if there was rubber in between. Can't say I've ever noticed the difference. I've driven loads of different minis over the years and I've never really noticed a difference. Maybe if it was a track day car you would notice a difference, but this one anyway is Mark III, solidly mounted. Bit of a fiddle getting it on. These two bolts holding this turret on here and the two bolts holding the turret on the other side are about that long. I think they're 7/16 UNF, and you've got to get four of them lined up at the same time really, which is easier said than done. But they did go on. It was a bit awkward, but they did go on, and it lined up perfectly. The holes in the toe board, the four holes, to this side, to that side, bang on. These needed a bit of wiggling and a bit of manipulation to get in, but they eventually went in. So all's good on the front subframe. we'll have a little closer look at that, just so I can show you the difference between the different types of subframe. So moving on to the panels around the front end on the front of this car, is you've obviously got the eye panels, then you've got the front wings, you've got the inner wings here, even though these are only what could be classed as repair panels, I suppose, which I think I showed you previously. So that roughly goes on there like that. They're oversized. I've already had a bit of a chop at them to try and get them to sit flat on the remaining inner wing. There's 4 holes here, but they're like the Grand Canyon. They're massive. I mean, that could be 10 mil either way. So even though it gives you a bit of a guide as to where this panel should be, should it be like that, should it be downhill, should it be more forward, should it be more back, it's a bit vague at the moment. So trying to establish where exactly this repair panel inner wing goes is a bit risky when you've got to cut the thing down. I mean, you only really get one chance of cutting these things down, so it's got to be in the right place. As you can see, I've already hacked off some bits. I've already been hitting stuff with a hammer, trimming little bits off in areas I know that are going to need modifying, just to try and get this to sit approximately where I think it needs to go. And the way I've established the approximate position of this panel is by one of the defining points of a front end rebuild, which is the front panel assembly, which is this expensive beast. This is a heritage panel. Luckily I managed to splash out on heritage because I've read and seen on YouTube how bad, I mean, these aren't that good, but looking at the non-heritage ones, they look quite poorly made. Lots of rippling in the panels on these corners. You can see the press marks on the bumper seam, but this seems okay. There's different styles of these front panels. This is supposedly for a Mark III front end, which is useful. I can't see that much difference between one of these and say a Mark IV. There's obviously different designs. You get on some of the later cars, you get little cutouts and things for front mounted radiators. Some of these support stanchions are different. You get some which are diagonal, some have got attachments for Cooper S oil coolers. So there are quite a few of these front panels, but there's a difference between a solidly mounted subframe, as we've got here, and a rubber mounted front subframe. There's not really that much difference. I mean, looking at I mentioned on the front subframe here, there's some mounting holes where this gets bolted on, and you'd look at the area that this gets bolted onto the front subframe, and you've got these 2 holes here. Now the bottom holes are the ones we're looking for through there, because you need to get access on the outside through there. So there's no way you can pick the wrong hole for mounting this, but at the top there's another pair of holes, and if this was a Mark IV, for instance, you'd probably get some kind of welded in captive nut there to bolt the rubber teardrop mountings on in that area. But there's nothing welded in there, so hopefully this is a dedicated Mark III solid mount subframe front panel, front valance arrangement. So I think we've got the right one. So if you're doing a front end rebuild, just do your research and make sure you're buying the correct panel. You don't want to be buying the wrong one, even though, like I say, there didn't seem to be that much difference between the two. So starting point is getting this thing bolted on and see what we've got to work with around at each side. So let's spin this thing round. Got myself some temporary bolts. So I'll push that through the hole there. We'll get it just, I've got my thumb on it through that hole there. I'm just going to push that through the subframe. I'm just going to do the same thing to the other side to take the weight. Makes it a bit more easier. So when I stoop over here and put some nuts on these bolts. Right, that's nipped up pretty tight. Not over tight. So this front valance has been bolted flat onto the front of this subframe through the bottom holes. It can't move east or west. It can't go up or down, but it's still quite flexible. There's a good ½ inch of movement there without me even trying, flexing it backwards and forwards. So from a setting out point of view for the front end, let me take you off the camera, off the stand rather. What have we got setting out point wise? Well, we've got the two bolts I've just shown you. Just bolted through there. There's the pair of top holes I mentioned, which aren't needed on this solid mounted front subframe. You can see the two UNF bolts there each side into the turret of the subframe. So you've got the solidly mounted subframe. This part here is part of the subframe, this little step, this shoulder, and then you've got some steel spacers there between the subframe and the shell cross member. So don't omit those. I don't think you get these spacers if it's a automatic car. Again, I'll stand corrected on that, but make sure that they're in there. On the underside, you can see how the subframe reaches down the toe board and underneath the floor pan, and there's a couple of, you can see how well those holes line up. I've only got a couple of bolts in there tightened up, but they were bob on. If this was a rubber mounted subframe, these legs here wouldn't be as long. You'd have some separate brackets here with some rubber on, but like I say, that's on a Mark IV shell onwards. Mark 1s and 2s and 3s and 3.5s, solidly mounted. So we've got to build the remaining front end around these defined points. And if we did have the complete inner wings on, if these sections hadn't been cut off, it would have been in many respects easier, because at least we'll know or have a better clue how we're going to stop this flexing, which doesn't help us define our position. So with the front panel on, or the front section of this inner wing on, and just have a look how that works. That front panel should slide behind these two black brackets. You can see it's easier said than done when you're a one-armed cameraman. So where does that go? Do we line it up with these 4 holes? Do we ignore them and push it forward? Well, there's only one way to find out, I think, and that's to get the bonnet on, because we're not going to know where the slam panel needs to start and end without the bonnet on. So we'll get the bonnet and continue with the jigsaw puzzle.